Thank you so much for purchasing one of my ceramic glaze recipes, specially formulated for all the potters that struggle to do nice recipes in South Africa because there's always some materials not available. So in this video I'm just quickly going to give you some pointers in how to use this recipe, how to mix it, how to just do a quick little sample, see how it fits to your work, and just a few tips along the way as well. And then by the end of it, you're going to have one recipe, and hopefully you can build it up to have a nice large library of glazes available for your work, which I will also show you how to make a brush on glaze from. Thank you.
So this is typically what your recipe will look like that you've bought, and the red triangle now indicates the name of the specific recipe, X140, and these are all your different raw materials. You'll see right at the top, base A is that transparent glaze from GlazeScore and the code GC2787, and then follows all the other additive raw materials. There we have the 200 grams sample mixture. This is just enough to do good samples, see if this glaze really works for you before you mix a larger batch. And then to the right, 1000 grams with its additives then. And this is just kind of roughly 1 kilogram, and then you can upscale it quite easily to how much you need in order to do proper dip glazing. I assemble my raw materials like this. So to the right you'll see the transparent glaze in the open bucket, and then for this specific recipe there's an additive of zircon and magnesite, which I will weigh off. So you'll see I've got a transparent container that I'll do my mixing in, glaze recipe to the front, and I apply my recipe with a piece of normal clear packaging tape. This seals the paper and make sure that it doesn't get wet during the mixing process. For the bulk measuring, I use a normal kitchen scale accurate to 1 gram. You'll see this is where I measure off the 200 grams of transparent glaze. Sometimes you have to scoop out a bit to get an accurate reading. Now I go over to my pocket scale. These little scales have to be accurate to 0.1 of a gram. You can easily get them from Takealot for less than 200 rand. So I use a clean container to weigh into and a clean spoon for each raw material. Make sure your little scale is tiered with your bucket on, and weigh off accurately according to the recipe that you've bought. So I add that to my base glaze that's weighed off, and I go on to the next ingredient. So remember, in this recipe there's only 2 ingredients that I need to add, and your recipe there might be a lot, up to 5, 6, even 7, depending on the complexity of your glaze recipe that you've bought. And adding that as well. So now I put away all my raw ingredients, my small pocket scale, but I keep my kitchen scale handy. It's quite nice for me to weigh off the water that I need to add to this mixture rather than measure it in a measuring jug. The option is for you to do it this way as well. And the amount of water that I add is the same as the total gram value of the mixture. So remember, you did 200 grams of your base glaze and then added different amounts of other raw materials. So just add up all those gram values and you'll know how much water to add in milliliters. Next step is sieving. So for this I'm using a normal kitchen sieve, a small test sieve, a hog hair brush, and an additional container. So using my hog hair brush, just mix out all the lumps that there might be. Sometimes the base glaze is quite lumpy, especially if it had some moisture exposure. So mix really well. I take my second clear container, put my kitchen sieve on top, which is just a holder, and my little test sieve on top of that. So now it's very nice. I've got two hands free, which makes this process a lot easier. So scraping out all those little bits left and the lumps. I will be able to mix this through with the hog hair brush, and the bottom of the sieve will assist quite a bit in breaking up those last bits of lumps. Make sure you really mix well. Now it's time to switch over back to my original container, and I repeat this process. Just really make sure that all the last bits of ingredients, especially if you've got additives like cobalt oxide or things like that, one little bit of a lump of cobalt oxide could be half the amount that needs to go in your glaze. So you do not want to have that stay behind in your sieve, because that will influence the result of your glaze recipe. So the next step is to determine what your volume to weight ratio of your glaze is. For this, I use a 60 milliliter syringe available from your local pharmacy, and my small pocket scale, and your glaze recipe that you've just mixed. So I start by pulling up and expressing the glaze, making sure that there's no bubbles in, and putting it on my scale and making sure I've got a tar reading. So now I pull up again and gently squeeze this out until I have exactly 50 milliliters. This needs to be very accurate. And reweigh. You will see there the reading was 71.5, and that is actually way too heavy. I want it down to around 70, so I'm going to add another 15 milliliters of water and mix that in. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding more water. I'm actually reducing the weight to volume ratio. So exactly the same, pull up again and reweigh. So the reading there is 70.4. That's a very good reading as a starting point, and I'm happy with that. So we're going to go ahead and do our test glazes. So it's always important to note what the ratio was. If you find from your results that you actually want the glaze to be slightly thicker, you make sure that that reading is higher. You might even have to add less water when you mix in. So now I'll show you the sample of glazing. You've seen there I've sponged off. And now to glaze with such little amount of glaze is quite tricky. So what I'm going to show you here is that you can use a taller vessel to put your glaze into in order to get a proper dip. This is a taller vessel, and that will make sure that when I do dip this little container upside down, it will actually submerge all the way. First I pour in, rotate, pour out to glaze the inside, and then I dip it upside down so it captures some air and really raises the glaze level in such a way that I can dip the whole item. Just touching up where my finger marks were. So there are many other ways of doing this, especially if you've got even less glaze left. So here I'm just pouring in, pouring out, and then I'm actually going to pour glaze over the top. Sometimes when you've got really odd shapes or very wide shape, this will work better. Just waiting for it to dry. And now you will see that there was a little bit of the rim on the inside that didn't get glaze. So I'm touching that up with my finger. But in the next little clip, I'll show you how I overcome this process, because I got quite a few of these while test glazing. So with this one again, pouring in to the inside, pouring out, doing a quick dip just to at least cover that rim, and then pouring the rest of the glaze over the outside. So by following some of these methods, you'll see that I easily dip at least 8 tea bowls like this from a 200-gram mixture, and some test styles as well. So you can get quite far with that little bit of glaze. Okay, so I just want to show you how I set myself up for cleaning the bottoms of my work. I do not use wax, so very simple system. I've got 2 sponges, 50 millimeters thick and 20 by 20 centimeters big. So the one I place in a container with water like this, so it's just kind of submerged under the water, and the next one goes on top. Make sure that your sponge fits into the flat of the bowl, because you want this top surface to be as flat as possible. Okay, so what's going to happen now is I've got a surface here to clean on, and when I want to clean this surface, I can really just kind of pull up water from the base, and it clears out the glaze that's sticking on here, and every now and again I can give it a flip as well. But it doesn't become too wet. If there is moisture visible like this, you can just kind of press it out. You do not want water dripping off the bottoms of your pieces when you clean it, but you want enough water to be able to clean efficiently. Okay, so here you'll see how I'm just cleaning the bottoms. Very simple, just rotating and moving to a clean area on the sponge, and you get a very nice clean surface. And so we get to our bonus feature. So what is very nice about this process is you can turn your leftover glaze. So remember, the glaze that you see in front here is dried out, so you can either just leave it for a week to evaporate, or I actually put it in my kitchen oven and let it stay there for 2 or 3 hours at around 70 degrees Celsius. Just remember that you need a very sturdy plastic bowl, or alternatively use a oven-proof bowl. And so you get a completely dehydrated powder again. The nice thing about this powder is your glaze material is completely dispersed because you sieved it in. And when you're working from a dry mixture like this, I find the results of mixing a brush-on glaze is really effective. You can also mix your glaze from the raw materials, as we've done, not add water, and then add some water and gum, as you'll see in this tutorial. But sometimes the raw materials don't dissolve as well. You see the materials that I need for this little exercise is once again my pocket scale. I've got the glue gun there on the right, so I'm just going to glue on a little sample disc so that I know what glaze is in there just by looking at it, not necessarily seeing a code. Then I've got a slightly larger container of around 250 milliliters and a smaller container of around 50 milliliters. And then also some ready mixed CMC gum. So I'm quickly going to first show you how to mix your CMC gum. Well, there's quite a wide variety of CMC gum. So you can buy CMC gum from any of your ceramic suppliers, and they vary quite a bit. So you'll see some need more water, some need less water. The specific one that I'm mixing here is from Glaze, and you actually need to add quite a lot of water to this one, but I'll show you how to adjust that. And just on a side note, you can also buy CMC gum from baking specialist store like Cab Foods. So what I do is I weigh off 5 grams of the powder. And I add to that 500 milliliters of water. So usually I first add my water into my container and then I add my powder. Now you'll see I'm going to use a stick blender to mix this. If you don't have a stick blender for your studio use, you can mix it by hand, but it's going to take about 2 or 3 days to dissolve properly because it makes terrible lumps. Some people use lukewarm water, so you can see what works best, but I just quickly put the stick blender in. And it very quickly becomes a gooey mass. It looks quite opaque now. It's just because there's a lot of air bubbles in, so the longer it stands, all those air bubbles escapes and you're left with a clear liquid. So this one's definitely too thick. I'm going to add another 200 milliliters of water. Give that a bit of a mix. And then it's up to you to determine the consistency that you want. I wanted kind of a really gummy, gooey solution. So it shouldn't be watery and just fall in, but it also should be able to drip slightly. So I'm going to show you, this is my mixture that's been standing a long while. So this is what your CMC gum looks like when all the air bubbles have escaped already. That's kind of the consistency that you want. Sometimes your CMC gum also starts deteriorating. So if you've mixed a whole batch and you come back in 2 months' time and it's really too watery, you can add a little bit more powder. It is a food safe ingredient, so it does deteriorate over time and it breaks up, and then obviously it doesn't add any of the gumminess anymore. I just break up all the little bits, compress it a bit to turn it back into powder. And this is a very nice and easy way of storing your glazes. There's no settling because there's water, it becomes rock hard at the bottom. And then I can mix small amounts of brush on glaze from here. I can also use it to further develop my glaze palette. So I can literally mix some of these glazes together, work out what the recipe is and go on from there. So I've placed the recipe on the bottom here, that just gets transferred onto my new container. And then you'll see I made this little sample tile, so it just needs to be a flat tile, doesn't have to be a little container shaped like this. It's just what I had, and I just glue gun that onto the front, making sure that the tile's not so big that you can't make these little containers stand on their bottoms and be stacked. And I just mark it with the glaze code as well. So this makes my life very easy. I can look at this, see the code, see how the glaze looks, and very easily find my way in my studio among quite a few hundred glaze samples like these. The next step is I take a little 50 milliliter container, put that on my scale, and I weigh out, in this instance, only 10 grams. You can mix larger amounts if you want to. I'm going to take 10 grams as a sample. And to each 10 gram powder, you'll see that I'm going to add 4.5 milliliters of water. Now obviously when you scale this up, it's very easy. You just take the gram amount, multiply it by 0.45, and you'll know how much water to add. This is where it's also very important that your original powder is very dry. If there's still some moisture in, you'll actually be adding too much moisture. And if it's not completely dry, it tends to make lots of lumps, which doesn't give you a very nice brush on glaze at the end. So I take a little paintbrush and I just mix this to a nice smooth paste. I don't mix large amounts of brush on glaze because they do tend to dry out, you know, even from commercial glazes that you buy. If it's been standing on the shelf for a few months, you get back and the lid wasn't on, it's rock hard and it's terrible to reconstitute. So I just do small amounts as I need it, because it's a very easy process to actually mix it from the dry powder. Now I pull up 5 milliliters of my already mixed CMC gum. So that's always exactly half the gram amount that you originally mixed in from the raw glaze powder. And that is literally all there is to making your own brush on glaze. So here I'm just going to quickly show you. I've got a little sample bowl here. So I'm actually painting over a already dipped white, just to see what the interaction is. But it's nice to see. It's a very nice paintable consistency. You can also use these flow line little applicators. So I just buy them from P&A. They've got a little plastic bottle, a old clutch pencil top, and another plastic top. And I pull up some of my brush on glaze into a syringe, put that into this little container, put the white stopper on, and just screw on this little nib. They are a fraction of the cost of your very expensive applicators that you buy from the pottery suppliers. And it's very easy to then do some more finer line work with your brush on glazes. And very easy to clean out. Make sure that you do clean these little bottles out before this kind of settles and dries, because then it's much more of a hassle. So here you'll see I am just marking everything. I can't say it enough. It is so important that you label and mark your things in your studio really well. So on my little brush on container, I've got the code that goes with my dried out powder reserve. I'm very lucky. I've got a 3D printer, so I've just printed these little containers that both of these fit into. And this one gets its place on my shelf in between all my other samples of glazes. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. I hope you enjoy your new recipe and everything that you will be able to do with it.